Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. So, I have been journaling on and off for the last 5 years, but really in the last 90 days, I decided to take it seriously and decided from like May 2022 that I was going to journal every single day for 90 days. And so, in this video, we're going to talk about 4 main things. Firstly, we're going to talk about why bother journaling in the first place, like what are the benefits of journaling. Secondly, we're going to talk about my own personal method for journaling, physically and also digitally, with apps and stuff. Thirdly, we're going to talk about the benefits that I've personally gotten from journaling. And then we're going to end with some top tips on how you can get started with journaling as well, if that's the sort of thing you're into. Let's go for it. Part 1, why bother with journaling in the first place? So journaling is surprisingly good for you. Like there's a bunch of evidence that shows that it's got physical health and also mental health benefits as well. But to be honest, the main reason I decided to actually take journaling seriously was because of the productivity benefits, unsurprisingly. And really the main benefit here is when we're journaling every day, firstly, it helps calm our kind of monkey mind, that mind that's sort of always like off in different directions thinking about all these different things. And it really helps you focus on the things that actually matter in your life. And certainly something that I found is that when I'm doing my journaling and I'm thinking about like, am I actually working on the right things? Am I going in the direction that I want to go? And kind of cognitively evaluating my life choices through the method of journaling, that really helps me kind of hone down on what are actually the important areas of life that I want to be spending my time on. And that therefore boosts my productivity, because productivity is just using your time well. And when I journal, it means that I'm more likely to use my time well. And to be honest as well, like dozens of podcasts I've listened to, there's people like Tim Ferriss who swear by journaling. There's a bunch of other entrepreneurs and authors and creators who I admire who say that like journaling has changed their life and it's like the best thing ever. And so I've always thought I've kind of dabbled with journaling here and there. I've never really fully taken it seriously. And so why not just give it a go? And so I committed to this 90-day experiment. Part 2, the 2 journaling methods, physical and digital. So one of the things that I think was great about my method of journaling this time around was that I had 2 different ways of doing it, a physical journal and also a digital journal. And I think having both is sick because you benefit from the benefits of digital and you benefit from also the benefits of physical, unsurprisingly. So the method I'm using is as follows. Basically, I'm using this Leuchtturm 1917 A5 size, I think it's A5 size, dotted paper. It's glorious. I've been using the Leuchtturm 1917 series of journals for over 3 years now, and it's just by far the best kind of plain paper journal I've ever found. I've tried all the Moleskine ones as well. I just prefer the Leuchtturm ones, and Neil Gaiman famously writes on Leuchtturm notebooks, so that's why this is the one. I also bought for it this like special little attachment-y thingy where you can stick it onto the thing, and then you can stick your pen onto the thing. Now this is a incredible innovation because now it means that the journal is always with a pen. And before, when I didn't have this thing, I'd always be struggling to find a pen and it would be too much friction. But now just paying a few extra quid for this thing on Amazon just made an enormous difference. And so what is the method? Basically, the method is that I carry this journal with me pretty much everywhere I go. It always stays in my bag. It always has the pen on it at all times. And if you're interested, the best pen I've ever found for journaling is the Lamy Swift. This is a rollerball pen, but to be honest, you can use any pen. Any pen will do, but this is the one. I've tested dozens and it's been my favorite one so far. So essentially, there's like 2 different ways that I do this. The first one is something called morning pages. Now, morning pages is this technique for journaling, which was written first by Julia Cameron in the book The Artist's Way. Basically, the idea behind morning pages is that first thing in the morning, you bust out your journal and you just write 3 pages by hand of whatever comes to mind, any kind of stream of consciousness, anything that's on your mind, anything you're feeling, anything you're thinking, anything you're working on, and you just write for 3 pages. And it doesn't matter if what you're writing is absolute garbage, but the point is you just write for 3 pages. And there's so many benefits like creatively of doing morning pages. My editor, Rachel, who's helping out with the book, also recommended morning pages. And I find that in the mornings when I actually write my 3 pages by hand, it's a weird feeling. It feels like it kind of unclogs my brain, and it means that when I get to writing or making a YouTube video or writing a lesson for a part-time YouTuber Academy, like it just feels like my thoughts are flowing in a way that they weren't before I kind of unblocked my mind through the morning pages. So that is my physical journaling method, basically very unstructured, morning pages vibes using the Leuchtturm 1917. But I also have a digital journaling method, and that is using the app Day One. Day One is sick. I've been using Day One since like 2017, 2016, something like that. It's available on Mac, it's available on iOS devices, and I think there is like an Android companion app that you can use, but sadly it is mostly Mac. I'm sure the Windows and Android heathens among us will find some alternative digital journal. But the nice thing about Day One is that I can open it on any device. So sometimes when I'm on my laptop, I will just do the journaling on Day One on the Mac OS app. Sometimes when I'm on my phone, I'll just open up the Day One app on my phone and just write a few things. And the cool thing about Day One as an app is that it's not just text you can write in it, it also syncs to your calendar and you can put images in it. I have a folder for my personal journal, and I also have a folder for nice comments. So anytime I see a nice comment, if someone emails it to me or sends me an Instagram DM or a Twitter DM, I will just screenshot it or share it straight into day one. And now I've got hundreds of nice comments in my little nice comments folder so that, you know, if I'm feeling down, I can just flick through these nice comments and it's kind of nice. But, you know, the main thing I want to talk about here is the journaling one. Now, again, there's no real method here. Usually, if I'm just on my laptop and I'm thinking, okay, first thing in the morning, I need to do some work or check some emails or reply to some Slack messages or do some book writing. Normally, instead of doing that first, I will just open up day one. I'll open up day one on my MacBook and I've locked it with Touch ID and it's all encrypted, so it's all safe and stuff, hopefully, fingers crossed. And I will just kind of, again, write whatever comes to mind. Sometimes I do morning pages by hand in the Leuchtturm 1917, which is technically what you're supposed to do, but sometimes I can't be bothered to do it by hand, and so I'll just type it out on day one on the app. Now, the real benefit of day one is that A, it's fantastic for archive, and B, they've got this on this day feature. So now that I've actually been doing this journaling thing for like 5+ years, like yesterday, I found a on this day entry from like yesterday and a year before and 2 years before. And it was just super interesting. I think I shared it on Twitter as well. It was just super interesting to see that, oh, what were the sorts of things that were on my mind 2 years ago? That was when I just left medicine. It was like my second week of being unemployed, having worked as a doctor for 2 years, where I had all these different thoughts and feelings around where's the YouTube channel going and what's happening with this, what's happening with that, what's happening with the team. And then a year ago was when I moved to London for the first time. And so all the thoughts and feelings around that. And then yesterday was, I mean, obviously a year on from that as we're thinking of moving the studio and like expanding the team and all this other kind of stuff. And it's just so cool seeing your own thoughts and feelings in a journal from years ago, and something like day one makes that super easy. Finally, the benefit of day one is that they've got a very good scanning feature. And so what I actually do is anything that I write in the physical journal, I will at some point scan into day one as well. And so day one is just sort of the single source of truth, which has all of the photos and all the scans and stuff of all of my handwritten journals as well. I also have a journal from like 3 years ago that I intend to scan into day one at some point, because again, I'm just imagining, you know, a few years down the line, 5-10 years down the line. By the way, you can always export the data as JSONs or as PDFs whenever you want, so it's not locked into the day one ecosystem. But I just love the idea that 5 years from now, I'll be able to look at exactly what I was writing in my journal 10 years ago and see how life has changed. And it's not just kind of like a navel-gazing type thing. I do find that when I look at my previous journal entries, it really kind of fills me with gratitude. Firstly, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you know, life has progressed so far and life is so good and stuff. And it also kind of really helps me appreciate the present moment, because it just sort of really solidifies this connection to my past self, where I think, oh yeah, that was the guy I was a year ago or 2 years ago, and this is the person I am now. And just, again, just being grateful for the present moment. Part 3, benefits I've got from journaling. Right, so the main one has probably been this idea of creative unblock, which we've already talked about. This idea that like, if like on days where journaling is the very first thing that I do in the morning, I find that I am more, quote, creative as a result, and I just have better ideas when it comes to book or YouTube videos or the business or the podcast or any of the other stuff that I work on. But then I think related to creative unblock is the second major benefit I found, which is essentially the processing of thoughts and emotions. So when it comes to processing thoughts, essentially whenever I have a thought about something and is a thing on my mind, then I will journal about the thing. So for example, loads of stuff in the business when it comes to making decisions about like, hey, who do we need to hire? Who do we need to potentially fire? What's the direction of the business? What are the projects we want to work on? All that kind of stuff. That all, like processing all that stuff really helps when I'm journaling. And then when it comes to processing emotions as well. Now, processing emotions is not something that I'm normally good at. And in fact, I did read this article from a psychologist, which basically said that men tend to find greater benefits in journaling than women do, because women tend to be more open about talking about their feelings and vocalizing them to their friends anyway, whereas dudes are worse at doing that. And I definitely, like, I am very bad at vocalizing my feelings and stuff, or even acknowledging and being aware of my own emotions. But when I'm journaling, one of the prompts that I like to ask myself, whether I'm journaling physically or whether I'm journaling on day one, is how am I feeling right now? And I often think, I don't really know how I'm feeling right now. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, I have to write something because I'm journaling right now. Okay, how am I actually feeling? And then I just try and describe my own emotions. And that's surprisingly useful, because sometimes I'm like, oh, actually life is pretty good. But sometimes I'm like, I'm actually feeling a sense of fear about this thing that's happening at work, or this thing, or like this sense of again, like fear, anxiety, stress around what does my life look like 2 years from now? What is this YouTube channel going to do? Is the book going to be any good? All of these insecurities that go around in my mind. And I find that when I write them down, I can really be like, oh, okay, cool. So I'm feeling this thing. Why am I feeling like that? I'm feeling like that because A, B, C, D, E. Okay, is this something that I want to be feeling? And then in a way, I can CBT myself out of those emotions if they're emotions I don't want to have. But in any case, acknowledging them through writing about them in the journal, either physically or digitally, just like really helps. And in a way, I kind of see the journal as my own personal therapist. And I kind of have these weekly coaching sessions with a chap called Corey, who's now a friend of mine, who does sort of executive coaching for entrepreneurs, which is basically therapy for entrepreneurs. And the sorts of stuff that Corey and I discuss in our kind of coaching sessions is very similar to the stuff that I will talk about in my journal. It's just that in my journal, I am the one who's in my own head and on the journal page, giving myself advice and asking myself questions. Whereas having that conversation with a friend or with a coach or with a therapist, it's like they're the ones asking the questions. And a lot of people I've spoken to who also swear by journaling say that it essentially serves the same, almost the same function as a therapist. So that's like a surprising benefit that I didn't quite appreciate. And then one more thing that I didn't fully appreciate beforehand is that often I will journal about big decisions that I'm making in my life or in the business or with the YouTube channel, or with work or personal life or anything like that. And sometimes I might want to get feedback on those decisions from friends. So my brother or like my housemate Lucia, or close friends. And I find that if I write in the journal, sometimes I'm thinking like, oh, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this is not necessarily a private journal entry. This is one where I'm going to be getting feedback from someone about this thing. And so the journal is just a nice place to be able to write up my thoughts. And generally, when I write up my thoughts, I can be like, oh, okay, here is why I'm making this decision for reasons A, B, and C. Here is the counterpoint, like, here's the steelman argument against why this decision is a good one. What do you think? And then I'll either screenshot it or just like show the laptop to the person I'm showing it to and be like, all right, can you have a read of this for 2 minutes? And basically just test my reasoning and just assess, am I on the right page or am I kind of missing something blatant? And usually they're like, yeah, no, that sounds very reasonable. That decision sounds reasonable. It sounds like the rationale for taking the decision is legit. But sometimes they'll be like, oh, have you thought about this thing? And I'll be like, oh, shit, I hadn't actually thought about that thing. And then I incorporate that thing into my decision-making apparatus. And so like journaling has had all of these benefits for me beyond the stuff that I knew of, like allegedly stress reduction and depression, anxiety, all the stuff that you read in articles on the internet. It's had a bunch of benefits for me beyond those.
Part 4, top tips for getting started with journaling. So tip number 1 is something that held me back for absolutely ages, which is basically this idea that journaling needs to be this fancy, elaborate procedure where I make my morning cup of coffee, I get the journal out, I sit down in my chair, I do the thing, and I form this whole elaborate ritual around the thing. And I would always find, as with everything that I've tried to form an elaborate ritual around, that I'd do it for like 2 or 3 days, and then I would stop doing it because something happened, or I was busy, or I was late, or I had to do a poo, or anything like that that stopped my ritual from actually happening. But the biggest tip that I've learned from having done this every day for the last 90 days is really, journaling is something that can be done anytime and anywhere. It does not require this ridiculous construct of BS that we're prone to put around it. And so what I found is, basically, whenever I have got some free time, I'll think, you know what? Why don't I just open up the journal? Like, that's just a default thought process that it is now. Whereas before it was like, oh, I need to put this as part of my morning routine. Tip number 2 is to screw any kind of journaling methodology. I find that rigidity is the ultimate killer of creativity and productivity and consistency. My whole thing recently has been about just lowering the bar as much as possible. And even if I write 1 word in my journal for the day, that's still a win in my book. I don't need to have filled out all these different prompts and different questions. So what I'd recommend is that if you're getting started with journaling, yes, prompts can be helpful and a methodology can be somewhat helpful. There's loads of them around. But if you're struggling with consistency and if you find yourself procrastinating or not doing the thing that you want to do, just like lower the bar. This applies to everything in life. You know, I speak to so many people who struggle to make a YouTube video every week, but the answer there is just lower the bar. Like, the more perfectionism you hold yourself to, the more you have this requirement that the video needs to be good, the less likely you are to actually post it. Similar with journaling, the more requirement you have that, oh, I must write my 3 pages, I must follow this little structured thing, the less likely you are to actually stick with it over the long term. Tip number 3 is that it's really useful to actually attach journaling to, like, anchor it to this other thing that you're potentially doing. So for example, when it comes to building habits, an easy way to build a habit is to anchor it to a habit that you already have. So let's say, for example, when I'm brushing my teeth, if I want to floss, then I will take the floss out and put it on the countertop. So I've anchored flossing to the brushing of my teeth because I'm already doing the brushing of my teeth, hopefully, and I've anchored the flossing to that thing. One thing that I do on that note is when I'm brushing my teeth, I do a little hamstring stretch because I'm trying to increase my hamstring flexibility, and I will just always forget in day-to-day life. But I'm like, you know what? I brush my teeth for 2 minutes twice a day, and therefore for 1 minute each time, I'm gonna hamstring stretch each leg. But the way that I've anchored journaling to a particular habit is that whenever I am on any form of either public or private transport, i.e. if I'm in an Uber going somewhere or if I'm on a train going somewhere, my default is not going to be, let me get out my phone and scroll, or let me listen to an audiobook. My default is going to be, why don't I get out my laptop and I'll just do a little bit of journaling. Sometimes when I'm on trains, if the train is sufficiently steady, I'll use my physical journal. But often if I'm in an Uber or something, or the train's a bit rickety-rockety, I can just take my laptop out. I always have my laptop with me. And I do get a bit car sick in the car when I'm looking at a screen. But the nice thing about journaling is that I can just open up day one and I can just like kind of type without looking. So I'll often just be looking out the window while typing away, and I'll find myself just sort of typing stuff in the journal. And then at the end of this 10, 15, 20-minute journey, I'll have journaled a few pages. And it's often really useful because it's like, that's dead time otherwise, where if I'm scrolling on my phone, I'm gonna feel sick. If I'm trying to do any other kind of work, I'm gonna feel sick. Yes, I could just sit around and just kind of be mindful and stuff, but I'm not very good at that myself. So I find that anchoring journaling to trains or Ubers has been just the biggest hack in terms of actually me doing more of it than I would have done otherwise. Tip number 4, if you're getting started, is that prompts can sometimes be helpful. Sometimes when I'm writing and I'm confronted with a blank page and I have no idea what to write, I'll do one of two things. Option number 1 is that I will literally write that, oh, I currently have no idea what to write right now. I'm feeling a bit of a block and blah, 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 blah. And sometimes I'll just repeat that line over and over again. I don't know what to write. 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 And eventually something will just start to happen. But the other strategy that I find useful to get around writing blocks is to use a prompt. And so a prompt I like to ask myself is, how am I feeling right now? And why am I feeling this way? Another prompt that I like to use is, where do I see my life 5 years from now? Am I happy with that direction? Another prompt that I like to use is, if I only had 2 hours a day to do work, what would I choose to do in that time? Another prompt that I like to use is, how am I currently feeling about my YouTube channel, or about my book, or about another major project in my life? Another prompt I like is, how am I currently feeling about my relationship? Or, whatever that might look like. The prompts are useful, but I find that being overly wedded to the prompts isn't. And so really it's about getting this balance between rigidity and like structure, i.e. the prompts, and also kind of throwing that out the window when you realize that actually I just need to do some free writing, because that's ultimately what's going to help me stick to this journaling habit. And finally, tip number 5 for journaling effectively, or at least what I found, is actually it's surprisingly helpful to do it first thing in the morning. That's the idea behind morning pages. You do it first thing in the morning. And even though I did say that I don't like to set elaborate rituals around it, there is like a 3-step morning routine that I now have, which is where I probably do, I'd say 60% of my journaling, and the other 40% is when I'm in Ubers or when I'm in trains. And the 3-step morning routine is, firstly, I get up, I go into the living room and I make myself a coffee using the coffee apparatus that my friend James Hoffman kindly gave to me a few months ago. Secondly, I will bust out my laptop and my journal, and depending on how I'm feeling, kind of choose to write in one or the other. And the third thing that I do is I open up my email, and there's one email that I read every morning, and that is the email from Morning Brew, who are very kindly sponsoring this video. If you haven't heard by now, Morning Brew is fantastic. It is a completely free daily email newsletter that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the world of technology and finance and business, which are like the 3 main things that I care about. It's stories that are sort of like the TLDR, just the summary of what is going on in the world of business, finance, and tech, with links to read more stuff. But it's kind of phrased in a very casual and entertaining way, which means it's the perfect start to my morning as I'm sipping my little cup of coffee and getting ready to start a journaling session. It's also nice because as I'm reading stuff on Morning Brew, usually in the world of tech or business, that tends to spark thoughts in my mind where I think, oh, that's interesting that that's happening in the world of tech. Maybe that could be a video about this thing. And then that gives me something nice and easy to journal about, because I've now primed my brain with stuff that's happening in the world that I actually care about. For example, Morning Brew keeps me up to date on what the hell is going on with Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter and what's happening with the trial around that. It also helps me keep up to date with crypto, and they've got a free crypto crash course where you can just read about stuff related to the world of crypto to understand what's going on, Ethereum, proof of stake, all the stuff that's happening in the world of crypto. And it's a great start to the morning because it means that I'm not scrolling social media as the very first thing I do. Instead, I'm getting the news about things that I actually care about, and then I'm sitting down to mindfully journal. Sometimes I'll journal about things that I've read, and sometimes I'll journal about things that are on my mind. But either way, thank you so much, Morning Brew, for sponsoring this particular video. And also, I have a sick interview with the founder of Morning Brew, Alex Lieberman, that's over on my podcast, Deep Dive with Ali Abdaal. That'll be linked over there and over there if you want to check it out. It's sick. We've had comments on that episode saying that this was like the single best episode of all time of any podcast that people have listened to, so you should definitely check that out. And if you like this video, you might like to check out this video over here, which is how writing online made me a millionaire. And actually, some of the stuff around that particular video stemmed from my fledgling journaling habit in like 2016. And that video kind of talks about my journey towards writing online and how ultimately starting a website and putting myself out there on the internet helped me get ridiculous amounts of financial success. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, you might like to check out that video over there. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you got some value out of this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.